Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on shapes, color, and value. These are three very important fundamentals and they are personally my favorites to play around with. I'm going to start by introducing these concepts to you. For those of you who are not so familiar with them, and I'm going to place them in the context of our overall goal for the class, which is to create an illustration of our original character. Because I know that when people talk about fundamentals, often you'll get examples with extremely basic shapes, such as circles and triangles or fruit bowls. And it can be difficult to make the connection between how to get from there to what you really want to draw. Alright, let's get started. Shapes, color, and value are all basic tools for communication of information. I think of painting and art as a form of communication between the artist and the viewer. In the same way that a writer will use words and grammar to convey what they want to convey, artists will use things like foundations. They are just the building blocks for you to play with. So let's talk about shapes. Shapes convey existence and personality and feelings. So what do I mean by existence? When you see these shapes, just by looking at them, I'm sure you could speculate what these shapes are. I don't give you any other information except for the shape of the object here, and yet you are able to distinguish that what this object is and that it's existing on this canvas in front of you right now. So I'm sure you would be able to tell that this is looking like a cat, this is looking like a giraffe, and this is looking like a car. There are some less obvious shapes in this group, such as these blobs down here, but they convey to you the existence of organic shapes. Even if there is no particular thing that I had in mind when I doodled these shapes down, you, looking at them, could probably still assume what they are. For example, you could think, oh, they kind of look like leaves. Or potato chips. Someone spilled a whole can of potato chips. The other thing that shapes can convey is personality and feelings. If you look at these two flowers down here, I've tried to draw the same flower, but with the use of different shapes. And I think that if you look at the one on the left, it will feel a lot more energetic and spunky. But the one on the right, it has rounder and calmer shapes. I'll zoom in a little so that you can see it better. These are two drawings of the same flower, and yet they give off such a different feeling because of the shape alone. The shapes that are used to construct the same flower. You can see, for example, the petals here are much longer and sharper, whereas this one is wide and round, along with the leaf. and they just give you such a different feeling. Moving on, you can see here I've done a little self-portrait with just shapes. I added the lines in so that you can tell the edge of the shape from each other since I made them all the same color. But this example is to explain my next point, that this information that is conveyed is relative to the context. What I mean by that is that the information conveyed by a shape will only make sense and can be changed by the things around it. So for example, you see that this shape right here, let me copy paste it to a new layer. This right here, it looks like a cone, and yet when it is placed on my head, it looks like an ear, right? In the context of these shapes that make up my hair and my face and my eyes, this looks like my ear, even though if you turn off everything else, this is just a cone. And if you place the same shape in a different context, it can be something completely different. For example, if I simply place a number of dots around it and a circle, suddenly my ear, the same shape that was my ear, has now turned into a snowman. And my ear is now a carrot. So that's the power of context. The shape is defined by both itself and the context that you place it in. And I suppose another thing to quickly mention is that despite the fact that these shapes are so basic, you can still tell that it's me because I am basic. No, I'm made of basic shapes. I have a few defining features, including my big bow and my ears and my hairstyle, which makes it pretty identifiable. Makes me identifiable, I suppose. So the last point that I wanted to go over in this section is the conveyance of personality and feelings through shapes, but with an anime character. So these look a bit more complicated, right? We suddenly jumped from circles and squares to a whole anime character, but you can break these down into basic shapes. For example, these ears, they're just little rounded triangles, like onigiri looking things. The eyes are just two lines, very round. The face is also very round. You can see that this character over here is overall comprised of round, unsuspecting shapes, giving them a very innocent and friendly or cute look. Whereas the character down here, essentially the same drawing, same character, but with a little bit different proportions and shape language. We have a very sharp jaw and chin. and sharp lines as well for the eyelid and the eyes. Very cat-like. You can see that the shapes already give off a very different personality, despite the fact that they're both drawings of some kind of cat person. The ears up here as well, they're more detailed and they have sharp fluff coming out. If I colored this in, you can see that the angle here, if I color in the ears, you can see that it has a very sharp corner here at the tip. Even within the ears, you'll notice that there's these fluffy parts, but they are incredibly sharp. With just changing something such as the shape of the ears and the eyes and the face, you can create such a different look for your artwork, or well, your character in the artwork. This can be applied to pretty much anything, not just characters, but also the environment. If I wanted to make this guy cuter, I could simply erase his current ears and give him some brown ones, like the ones in the above drawing. Doesn't he look cuter already? Okay, moving on to introduction to color. Color can convey a lot. It can convey the inherent color of an object, so just its natural color, the atmosphere of an environment, and emotion. And just like shapes, this information is conveyed relative to its context. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, when we think about what color this hand is, perhaps you would think the blanket color would be something like this, something like this, something warm, right? But if I color pick it, you can see that it is actually blue, very slightly blue, mostly gray, and very slightly blue. How is that possible? It is because we have contextualized the blue by surrounding it with this brownish pink color and this yellow gray and some orange. So now when we place the blue onto this, overall, the inherent color of this object will still look correct. Even though none of these colors that we initially thought it would be are used. When you think of drawing someone's hand, generally you're not taught to think of picking the color blue. You know, in kindergarten, when you're handed a box of crayons, you'll get to know all of the brightest colors, and that's great for learning to differentiate each color. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, pink. But later on, when we want to draw more complicated things, it gets harder because we are stuck to this thought process that the grass is green and the sky is blue. So we pick a very blue-looking blue and a very green-looking green and place them down. But in reality, things have so many more colors. The sky is a gradient of countless different hues. The grass is also made up of so many other colors. And that's why this concept can be a little confusing for people at first. But once we get to know that each surface is inherently made up of so many more colors than just one, we start to be able to understand color a little more. The next thing that I wanted to explain about color is its effect on emotion and atmosphere. So for this piece that I've drawn, I wanted to express a happy atmosphere, a happy emotion, and a summery atmosphere. So I tried to think in my head, what kind of colors would express that? And I went to find some color references, and I used the colors that I felt looked nice together and expressed what I wanted people to feel looking at this image. And so I've color picked a bunch of colors from this image, and I want you to think, what do these colors make you feel? Maybe this is kind of a difficult question when you only have this set of colors to look at, so I've prepared another set of colors for you to compare them to. Out of these two color palettes, which one would you choose for an artwork that you want the viewer to be happy looking at? You would probably choose this one, right? These colors are more bright and energetic. Yellow especially tends to be a color associated with happiness. But then if I asked you which color palette would you choose for an illustration of a dirty city alleyway, you would most likely choose these colors because these are the colors that we generally associate with a alleyway, a dirty city alleyway. We can manipulate the emotions of the viewer and create atmospheres by drawing from their real life experiences. You know that these colors are happy because there are things in reality that cause us to associate these colors to be more happy than these ones. And for these colors to look more like what you'd find in an alleyway than these ones. Because if you look down a city alleyway, you're more likely to see these colors than the ones on the left. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own technique because that is a very common question that I get asked. How do you color? And this is something I had trouble with because when I was learning how to color and watching other people's explanations on it, I didn't quite understand because many of the videos that I watched were to do with concept art and they're very calculative. And I came to realize that I'm not very calculative when it comes to color. I have two primary ways of putting down color, and I've listed them here. So option one, I've named winging it. Essentially what I do is I'll place a color down and it'll be my establishing color because it's going to not determine my other colors, but every other color I put down after the first is going to be influenced by this first color. In that, for example, if I started with this blue color and I say all my white colors are going to be shaded with this blue, then after that, every color I'm going to put down, I'm going to make sure that it looks nice with what I've already established. So for example, when I put these leaves down, I made them, they're meant to be green, but I've also made them quite blue, as you see in the color wheel. Because step 2, place next color that complements the existing color. And pretty much I just go on to keep repeating step 2 over and over and over. Making sure that every new color that I place down looks nice with everything that I've already established. And if I find a color that I put down that I don't like, I think it clashes, then I will change it. I will change it until it looks like a color that works. So the other option is option 2, mood first. Generally, I will use this option over option 1 if it's a more complex and detailed illustration. Option 1, generally I use it when I'm more comfortable with what I'm drawing or it's just something casual. So what I mean by mood first is step one, I'm going to establish the mood. I want to think about what I want this artwork to extrude, what energy for it to be, what energy I want to be coming out of it. How I want the viewer to be affected, or how I envision them to be feeling when looking at the illustration. And once I have that down, I will go and look for a color reference or a few color references that reflect the mood that I want. And then I will use that reference to determine the colors in my own illustration. Let's say this artwork that I've drawn is the reference. And I'm going to apply it to this little landscape I've got going on down here. Let's see. If I take all the green, and this green is in the light, so let's grab the green that's in the light. I could also eye these out. Since this is my own drawing, I can color pick it, but if it's someone else's artwork, you don't want to only use the entire same colors as someone else, out of respect. I'm going to apply it, and I see that they have I have a little darker green as well. I'm going to gradient it in. I'm going to grab the shadow and take these and put it in. Now I'm going to apply it to the sky as well. So in my original image, I actually don't have a sky. So what am I going to do? What color do I make the sky if the reference doesn't have a sky? I'm going to take just a blue from the background and see how it looks. Does it still look like a sky? Perhaps not. So I'll take some other blues and see if I can still make it look like a sky while using the colors from the color reference. Now the landscape looks a lot different, and I've applied the colors from my reference. So I undo it. You can see it looked a lot more overcast and a bit toned down, but once I apply the colors, it's bright and summery, just like this. And if I want to add in some flowers, dot them in. There we go. That's essentially the other option for how I personally go about colors. I hope that was helpful. Finally, the last part of our introduction is introduction to values. Value is a fun one, and something that I think confuses and scares people a little because it's a little bit confusing. Like, how does black and white turn into color? But anyway, let's get into it. Value can convey light and dark, and it can also convey focus. Essentially, it defines the composition. People will see your values first when they look at your image. It is the most defining part of your composition. That's why it's so important. It can also create depth, as shown here. So we have a 2D shape, a sphere, and you add values to it. These values, dark and a highlight, and you get a 3D form, a sphere. This looks much more 3D than before. Alright, so values. What are they and how do they work? For me to explain that, I'm going to get you well acquainted with the color wheel. If the outer ring is colors or hue, then this part, this vertical part of the box inside is values. And the horizontal part is saturation. But we're going to focus on values. And the interesting thing about values is that it actually is not only this part, because different colors also have different values. If I make this color wheel black and white, you'll see what I mean. So yellows are actually lighter in values than blues, which are the darkest. Just one more thing to throw at you when it comes to values. That was a little confusing. Let me show you the importance of value through a little demonstration. So I've drawn up a quick doodle of me. And I have a question to ask you. Which aspect do you think makes this drawing most recognizable to be me? The color or the value? So you may think at first that it's the color, because the colors are my color scheme. Definitely looks like my color scheme. But if I apply different hues to this artwork, it still kind of looks like me, maybe just in different lighting. However, if I mess with the values, so let's say I pick the color of my hair and I make it much, much lighter. So I haven't changed the hue at all. I'm just making the hair lighter in value. And I color that in. And then I grab my skin tone and I bring it down to be a much darker value, but I haven't changed the color. The color is still this orangey color. And I put it in. Now, okay, let me go a little lighter so you can see my line art. Now the character looks much more different than if I just changed the color alone. You can see that it is also very hard to distinguish the hair from the background because they are such similar value now. Before, my darker hair would contrast against the background color. And now, because they're so similar, it's like it's blending in to the background. If I turn on black and white mode now, you'll see the difference as well. It's so similar that without the line art, it would be quite difficult to tell where my hair ends and the background starts. However, with the previous values, you can see immediately. Even if I didn't have line art, unfortunately the line art is merged, so I can't actually turn it on and off to show you, but I think it's quite obvious. But let's say that I decided to dye my hair color into this pastel brown, this ashy pastel brown. How do I make myself stand out again from the background? Well, you can change the value of the background. And suddenly, I am no longer melting into the background. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that with values, there's a spectrum of how many values you use in an artwork. On one end of the spectrum, you will have Notan, which is a Japanese design principle that is all about balancing light and dark. Then on the other end of the spectrum is full value range, which you might see with more realistic works or photos, for example. Essentially, the more right you go, the more values that you have in your illustration, and the more left you go, the less values, because Notan generally is just about working with light and dark, simplifying everything into just these two categories. And since it's a spectrum, you can fall anywhere on it. Therefore, I wanted to kind of show you what parts of this spectrum may look like with anime style artwork. So obviously, this artwork on the left right here, let me just revert the background. The artwork on the left has less values than the artwork on the right. It is definitely leaning more towards Notan. Maybe somewhere around here. And this artwork definitely has more values, but when we turn it on to black and white, and if you just eyedropper around the image, you'll see that values-wise, it actually jumps around a lot. So we are not using full value range. It would fall maybe somewhere in the middle. If I decide instead to change the shading into something more soft, so over here this was cell shading, where I just use a full opacity brush to block in the shadows, and then I turned it to linear burn and reduced the layers opacity. If I turn that off and instead use soft shading, you can instantly see that this artwork is looking a little more realistic. And if I continue to add some more lighting, and then we turn the black and white back on, and if you decide to color pick now, you'll see that while the color picker makes jumps, because I'll be jumping between the skin and the hair, which is just very different values. If I stick around on one part of the character, you'll see that it is a very smooth transition compared to before. So this illustration has way more values than when I just had the cell shading. So this might fall somewhere over here. And you can see that the closer you get to Notan, the more abstract the image is, and the closer you get to full value range, the more realistic you get. You can portray a lot of realistic lighting. Where you fall on this spectrum, depending on your own preferences, can impact your style heavily. And yet, I would say that all of these different styles can be appreciated in different ways. So there's no right or wrong way to go about it. You just want to make sure that you create focus with your values. Ensure that people can always tell what is going on. Commonly, artists will choose to work with a limited value palette to reduce the complexity of the scene and make the main elements clear. It also places an emphasis on form and shapes rather than detail. So while this artwork on the left looks a lot more simpler than this artwork on the right, I'm sure there's some of you who would prefer the artwork on the left. More values and more detail doesn't necessarily mean a better artwork or a better result. But you can create a good result no matter how many values you use, as long as you compose the illustration well. Values are an incredibly essential factor to making illustrations, but I know that it can be quite difficult to wrap your head around. So I'm going to give you two more examples about how you can use values to change your artwork in different ways. Change or fix or manipulate. So I'm going to use an artwork of mine from quite a few years ago. I'd say it actually looks pretty okay because if I turn on the black and white, you can see that the head really stands out because there's a lot of detail here and due to the face, and the hair is so much darker than the things around it. So what can I do to the values to make this better or different? What options are there? I decided to show you how to add more detail, more values in. Just an example. So I've gone ahead and added some more texture and detail using values, just inserting more values into the character, because you can see that if I grab the eyedropper, the skirt is mostly just this one color, very little bits of shading here and there, and the shirt it's just like this one massive blob of white. So by adding more values, it splits up those massive shapes into more complex shapes. And this can change the look of whatever you're drawing. Less detail, more detail. And there's no right or wrong with this, it's just a different option. But it can be strange, for example, if you have more detail in one spot and then less detail in another, because value is relative. So if the skirt is so detailed and then this shirt suddenly has no shading, it makes this shirt look very two-dimensional in comparison to the skirt. It looks unnatural. It looks like it's not really bending around the character's body like it should. Like this way, you know what I mean? Whereas you can tell that this is bending around the thigh because of this shading that I've added. However, if both objects are flat and the legs are flat, the skin, the cat, mostly flat, the chair, it will look normal because of the things around it. Like you've set up the rules for this world in your artwork that these things don't have that much shadow. So as long as you keep it consistent, people will be able to look at this and it won't look as unnatural. Same for here. When I started adding in detail, I had to detail the entire character. Otherwise, it would look strange if I just kept some parts incredibly flat. And suddenly you have this very flowing and 3D looking shirt, while you have a completely flat skin and skirt. Basically, it'll accentuate the difference between these areas of detail because people can compare the two in their head. Of course, you can still do this if you want. It doesn't look too bad because in the end, this sort of shading up here, it's still kind of in line with the shading and the style of this artwork. But if I, for example, made it soft all of a sudden, now it'll look incredibly out of place because the level of values contained in this one shirt is so much more than the parts next to it. I'll show you the difference in black and white as well. And you can see that it's not really, there's no clear, like which one's better or worse. There's just one is more detailed and one is less detailed. Some people will prefer this less detailed option. Some people may prefer the more detailed version. The next example I want to give is also an old artwork of mine. So I drew this a long time ago. Clearly, I wasn't really thinking about values at all back then. I barely knew what they were, how to really think about them while doing my artwork. I think back then, in my mind, I was just like, this looks pretty, I'll do that. That makes a good effect. That looks interesting. Okay, I'll do that. And this was the result. I'm going to show you how I would use value now with my current experience and my tastes to improve the readability of this artwork. So there's some problems that can be identified quite easily right now. I'd say it's very unclear, the body of the character. You can't really tell what's the body, what's the hair, what's the dress. They're all so similar in value. If I just eyedrop it right now, you can see it's stuck up in this corner. People can barely tell what's going on here. So I want to make it, I'm going to use value to make it stand out, make the body stand out from the hair, and I want to make these foreground elements, the paint and the paint cans, also pop out a bit more so that they match the earth from the space behind it. Give it some dip, essentially. Using value to create focus and dip. That is the goal. So I've just created a linear burn layer, and if I turn it to normal, it's just, I put a little gradient on it to give it an effect, but I painted it in with just a G pen, a fully opaque G pen, and I changed the layer mode to linear burn, and I put it to about 45% opacity, the layer. And I've used this layer to both define the body, some of the hair patterns, and make the existing shadows a little darker as well. That one shadow under her dress. And then after that, I went and selected all the hair. And then I just used an airbrush and painted it in, and then I erased around the body so that the legs would still stand out from the hair, but I wanted the hair to really fade out as you get towards the corners. So you can clearly see that the outline of the body is so much more noticeable now that I've added these shadows in, these darker values. And also you can see where the dress ends and the legs start, and a bit more separation between the legs and the hair. The dress and the hair are still blending together, but I don't mind too much. If I wanted to, I could add some more lines to indicate that edge, but I think it looks fine like this as well. The paints in the foreground, there's much more depth between the paints and the hair now. They stand out so much more with the darker value behind them. If I turn it into the black and white, you can see that there's more contrast here now, and they look like they're floating in front of the character instead of blending into the character. So yeah, values can make a huge difference. The only thing is that I don't ever actively work on the values. I know that some artists, they will start with a black and white first. So they start with the values, they sort that out, and then they put color on. But for me, I like to just color, and I'll have value in the back of my mind while I am figuring out what I want focus to be on, what I want to bring attention to, because it just has such a huge impact on the viewer's experience. You can coordinate so much of the viewer experience just through values. Alright, I hope that this introduction to shapes, color, and value helped you all get more acquainted with these 3 very important foundations. Welcome to Shapes, Color, and Value exercises. If listening through the introduction was your level 0 initiation, then these are level 1 to 3. On the left side here, I have placed 2 artworks, one from Monet and one from John Singer Sargent. Feel free to use them if you'd like. But otherwise, you can also pick your own images for this exercise. I chose these because they are public domain, so I'm allowed to use it for this class. And down here in the corner is the website that I got them from. There are other public domain images there as well, so feel free to check out that resource. For level 1, it is quite straightforward. You don't need much experience with anything except for, I suppose, knowing how to use the color picker tool. You have two options actually. You can either use the color picker tool or you can just practice color picking with your eyes. So for example, this blue area right here, the darkest point of Monet's image, I'm going to try and color pick it. I'm practicing my own observation skills as to what this color could be. And now that I think I've got the one, I'm gonna color pick it. It actually doesn't look right. I'm gonna choose it, move it a little bit. Okay, that should be close enough. And then color pick said area. Color pick the said area and put it down. Now check between the color that you picked and the actual color and see how close you got. If it's quite far, make an observation. What went wrong? Was the hue off? Was the value off? And try to get better. Try to do better for the next one. Once you have your color palette, whether from observation or just from color picking, you want to make an observation between these colors. What colors are used where and for what purpose? So I have grouped them already. For Monet, this is light. This is light. This is the shadow. And this is the darkest points. Shadowy, shadower, shadowist. Shadowist. And what I like to do personally is going through these and just observing where on the color wheel and the color cube, the color square, do these colors fall. So he likes to use both cools and some warm, but mostly they stay around this area within the cube. You can either screenshot the cube or just make a note of it in your head or write it down. And the shadowist is kind of the same actually. He uses warm colors and cool colors, but it's a bit darker in value than shadow. And then the light stays within this upper corner and only really uses, uses some mostly just warm colors. So you just want to go through and make these observations and understand a little what these colors are used for and how do these incredibly skilled painters utilize them. That is all for the level 1 exercise. On to level 2. So level 2, you see these weird looking spheres. Essentially what I've done is I've figured out the rules that make up the world inside these paintings. And I've taken a white sphere and I've put it into that world and applied that world's rules. So what you did in level 1 is kind of discovering the rules of the world. The shadow wisps are here, shadow is here, and the light is here. So what I want you to do in level 2 is draw a sphere. So this actually requires you to understand how to draw a sphere. That is your background knowledge going into this exercise. You need to know how to draw a sphere with some lighting coming from the top right corner. There are a lot of tutorials on how to draw a sphere online. I'm sure you don't need to hear it directly from me. So yes, please prepare your sphere drawing tools, your sphere drawing brain, and draw a sphere, but using the rules of level 1, the rules that you've discovered. And the reason I get you to draw a sphere is because, you're exactly in level 3, you're doing the exact same thing. You're applying these world's rules to a subject matter. But in this case, the subject matter is just so much more complicated, and that's why for level 3, you need to be able to draw a character. You need to be able to draw some sort of character. Here I've drawn 2 anime girls. But you can draw whatever type of character you want. The only thing you need to do is apply the rules from level 1 to your character. And the thing about this is characters are essentially a whole bunch of simple shapes, but just put together. That's why it's important to get the hang of simple shapes first. Because once you know how to draw simple shapes, you can draw more complicated shapes that are just like 3 simple shapes smashed together into a complicated shape. Imagine you grab a sphere and a square and a cylinder and you kind of just stick them together. It suddenly becomes a complicated shape, but if you know how to handle 3 simple shapes, you can handle this strange chimera object that you've smashed together. So I hope that explains the 3 exercises I have prepared for you. And essentially, just to explain why you should do these exercises and what exactly you are training. Level 2, since I already explained level 1, level 2 is about applying a reference. Whenever you're drawing, using references can help the process a lot. And it is also a great way of learning. Because these artists, they've already figured out rules for their own worlds, and these rules create beautiful paintings. And now you're going to yoink these rules that these artists have created and apply them to your drawing so that you can create a nice result. The only thing about this is that if you are yoinking from an existing artist or someone who's not in the public domain, then you want to be respectful about it. You don't want to be seen as a plagiarist, because we are yoinking them to be quite similar. If it is very noticeable that you have yoinked from an existing artist, the existing artist may feel sad. And if that artist is someone you look up to, you don't want them to feel mad or sad, right? So you have some options. You either don't upload it and just keep it for your own improvement, or you credit them. You publicly credit them, and most artists will be most artists will be all right with that. And if they aren't, then you learn and take it down and don't post it online until you can draw things that look more unique, I suppose. Look less like you just ripped off the artwork. And for level 3, it is just expanding on level 2. You are using your pre-existing knowledge of the shapes of anime girls or whatever characters you want to draw and applying this reference to it. And in this way, you can learn how to draw like your favorite artist, but please be aware of the warnings that I suggested about plagiarism. Okay, well, that's it for the explanation. I hope that you guys will enjoy doing these exercises. I thought it was pretty fun to make this Monet sphere, this hairy looking Monet sphere, and this clay ball of a sergeant sphere, and trying to apply them to some anime girls. Okay, I will see you in the next lesson. Bye bye.